Here's part 2 of my conversation with Dawson Church. We dive into the details of eco meditation, the research behind it, and most importantly, how you can transform your life with this one simple practice. Welcome to Evolving Humans, the podcast for awakening souls. I'm your host, Julia Marie. Settle in and get ready for another spirited conversation. Now, you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but I just want to reiterate. A lot of people think that meditation is difficult. It can take years. That whole 10,000 hour rule can take years to master. But I feel like you've hinted at, and now I'd like for you to please explain a little bit about what you call the eco meditation process.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I came up with eco meditation because meditation is hard for most people. And when I joined the spiritual community at the age of 15, the meditation master said, meditation is simple. All you do is sit there, close your eyes, still your mind. And like most people, I couldn't still my mind. My mind has started racing. In fact, you close your eyes, the default mode network really gets going. Now you're really thinking about all the bad stuff going on, and you're worried and you're anxious. And so it doesn't work for most people. And the way most of us are taught to meditate, I took meditation classes, I took Buddhist meditation classes, I read books, and the reason I'm so well known for my meditation methods now is I pretty much was the world's worst meditator. I would just have my mind full of distraction. So I found, though, that science to the rescue. Science came to the rescue because I read studies showing, for example, that heart math is really effective at producing heart coherence. Self-hypnosis has some wonderful techniques to it. Mindfulness can help you with that. Breathing and biofeedback, neurofeedback, EFT tapping on acupuncture points calms you. So in 2009, I was playing with all of these different methods of meditation. After about 10 years of meditating daily, and I'd learned all of these and I would use them intermittently, then I thought, how about if I use all of these methods in sequence? How about if I tap on acupressure points and then do heart coherent breathing and then do neurofeedback, biofeedback, then do mindfulness, then do self-hypnosis. And I found that the sequence of all of these things put me into a really deep state very, very quickly. So I began to offer it to other people. Suddenly they found they could get into a meditative state, even if they'd failed everything else they tried. And I put it up on the web, called it Eco Meditation, ECO Meditation. It's been free for the last 15 years or so on the web. Millions of people have begun to use it, and it just gets you there in a flash. You just do this, takes about 5 minutes to stack those practices on top of each other, and you're just in this really relaxed state. It calms the default mode network. We now have MRI scans showing that it just calms the default mode network down. And the network, brain network that is responsible for compassion and altruism and gratitude and happiness and various kinds of positive emotion, that part is highly active in eco meditation. So that's what I've been doing and practicing myself ever since.
I think it was probably the stacking component that intrigued me. It wasn't just like one thing. I'm very happy you are bringing this to the world. Now, how can this process, this meditation process, change how my brain functions when I'm not meditating, for example?
That's a very good question, Julia. And what we're doing when we meditate is we are training our physiology to be a certain way. And what happens after a while of that training, and for eco meditation, the period is about 30 days. Now, eco meditation is very, very effective because it's physiologically based. It's using the stack of our procedures one after the other, and they take about 5 minutes to do the whole stack. And then we're in that space. We regulate our physiology. So what eco meditation is doing, it's giving us that physiological regulation really, really fast, and then it shifts the way our brain functions. When we shift the way our brain functions once or twice, and people usually will, the very, very first time they try it, they're usually like, wow, okay, I tried that. That really put me into a pleasant, relaxed, deep state. Then they do it again, and they do it again, and they do it day after day after day. And in a clinical trial, we found that after 30 days of doing it, substantial anatomical change happened in the brain. Now, if you think about substantial anatomical change happening in any part of the body, that's like me saying, okay, go to the gym, work out, go onto the bars, and let's do some arm lifts for 30 days, and you're going to have gigantic physiological change. And you aren't, you're going to work out, and after a month, you're going to see maybe a tiny bit of change, but it'll take you 3 to 6 months to see your body reshaping itself, and a year or two to see big shifts in your body. Our brains work much faster, transform much faster than our muscle fibers. So you do eco meditation every day for that 30 days, and you're going to find remarkable shifts happening in just that very, very brief 4 week period. And you literally are changing the anatomy of your brain. We find that that default mode network gets very quiet in only a month. And that compassion network lights up dramatically in that 30 days. So with eco meditation, you're producing rapid brain change, enormous amounts of pleasure. All of these pleasure chemicals that are unlocked, like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, and anandamide, make you feel really good. So now you're feeling good as you shut down the default mode network, as you activate these other pleasure neurochemicals, and you tend to repeat the process. So people will start eco meditation, and I'll say, do it for a month, just 1 month, and people hardly ever stop because they feel so good after that. So I challenge all of you listening, just go to ecomeditation.com, download the track, it's free there, and then do it for a month, and you're likely to get totally hooked.
Now, that's the kind of an addiction the world needs more of, I would say. So, we've talked a lot about the process itself, and you've told me basically I could change my world in 30 days. Now, I enjoyed chapter 6 where you talked about how it's possible to change the hardware in my brain using the software of the mind. And you talked about altered states versus altered traits. So what's the difference first between the two? And how can eco meditation help me make the shift?
A state is something you experience temporarily. So you go and look at a beautiful sunset, and that fills you with inner peace. So now you have the experience of inner peace. You go and read a great scripture. You listen to an inspiring speaker. You go and hear some really uplifting music, and now you're in this wonderful state. But then you walk out of the concert hall, or the sun sets and you go home, and the experience ends, and you're right back to the way you were before. So states can be pleasant, but they're temporary. Also, states of distress are temporary. If you get upset, you'll be upset for a while, but you're making a lot of the stress hormone cortisol, and after a while it is going to diminish. And so you may be triggered. You may get angry, resentful, upset, shame, blame, any of those negative emotions, and you'll be there as a temporary state for a while, and then it'll pass. A trait is when you are happy as your disposition. You are a happy person, a fundamentally happy person. And what we found, the astonishing thing that's going on inside our brains is that when we experience states, they are producing patterns of firing in our neurons. And so I'm feeling this happy state. I'm firing the neural bundles of happiness in my brain, and neurons that fire together wire together. So now, after firing those happy neurons for a week, a month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, now I've been bulking up these inner neural muscles inside my brain. They've gotten much, much bigger. Now I'm happy almost all the time because I built the neural wiring around that. Now I have happiness as a trait. And exactly the reverse thing can happen with negative emotion. Negative emotion is producing neural wiring. In one study of twins, male twins, where one twin went and served in Vietnam, the other twin did not go to Vietnam. These men had identical genes, very same neural firing patterns before they went away. When they came back, the twin that had been to Vietnam developed a much faster stress response in the brain and developed traits to do with hypervigilance and avoidance. And many of the characteristics of PTSD hardwired into the brain. It works both ways. And so you are hardwiring your brain by the way you think. You are using the software of your thinking to produce hardware in your brain. Every thought you think, every emotion you feel. And if you don't take control of the process, you're just being triggered. You have all these negative emotions running around. You build those neural pathways in the brain. And often, if you're running the neurochemistry of stress, anger, resentment, blame, shame, guilt, all of those negative emotions, those pathways get bigger. And PTSD, for example, the symptoms usually get worse and worse and worse throughout your lifetime until you die a fairly miserable death at a fairly early age. I mean, the results are not pretty for medical outcomes for people with PTSD. And so this has real consequences for your health and longevity. But if you meditate and you're firing all of these patterns in your brain, all of these pathways of kindness and compassion and gratitude and joy, thankfulness, optimism, you're making all of those your normal state. Those states eventually rewire themselves into traits, and that becomes your brain. So when my wife and I had the fire, we were dysregulated. We had traumatic stress. We were miserable. We lost everything we owned. It was not an easy time for us, as I talk about in that first chapter of my book, Bliss Brain. But we were resilient because we had spent years meditating and tapping and all these other spiritual practices. And they gave us all that hard wiring of resilience. So you want to do all this stuff before you lose your job, before you get sick, before you get divorced, before there's a downturn in the economy. Do all of this stuff and use your mind intelligently to build those traits of resilience. You've used the software of your mind to use the hardware of your brain, and you have this brain that's, I just tell you, it is so wonderful to live in a brain that is full of love and kindness, and you still have bad stuff happening that's going on that will upset you, and you are just basically have this trait, all these positive traits of optimism, joy, happiness, and gratitude. So they're now hardwired into the actual physical structure of your brain.
And you tend to respond to a situation instead of react to it. And that's not a bad thing. Now,
Yep.
we've talked about the positive effects meditation can have on our brain and how it can change our brain. But what are some of the other things, the other activities that maybe some of us do that can change how our brain works, maybe in a not so positive way?
Who you associate with makes a big difference. If you are hanging around people who are negative, who are processors of negative emotion, that negative emotion is triggering mirror neurons in your brain and is going to drag you down. And so what you'll find is there's a negative spiral. And we've all been part of conversations where somebody says something a little bit negative, and then somebody else says something negative, and then you, before you know it, you've really just gone down the drain in terms of the vibrational energy in the room. And so you want to Pick positive people for your life. Pick positive people for your friends, for people who are close to you. Find the most inspirational people you can possibly find. Spend time with them. Media, what are you putting into your field of awareness? There's an old saying in computer science, garbage in, garbage out. If you're consuming all kinds of garbage media with negativity and violence and criticism, and like I watched some stations and listened to some, like I was in a taxi cab recently, and the driver was listening to a program, and clearly he just has this running his whole shift. He just has the radio tuned, this talk station. I don't even know what the talk station was, but there was this constant um, patter of negativity. It was called news, but it wasn't really news. It was just basically negative commentary on other people and things, and name calling, and it had no value at all. I think garbage in, garbage out. What is this doing to this guy's neurology? What is this doing to his mood? How do you stay positive when you're pulling all this garbage into your from media? So just turn that stuff off. Just quit watching it. You'll find after a while, once you've rewired your neural network, you don't really want to watch those gory movies anymore, or those violent images or scenes. You can't make them go away, but you can certainly not participate in them yourself. So media, what books are you reading? What are the visual images you're bringing in? Like, when I watch a movie and there's a scene that's just, violent, and I can't avoid it, I just close my eyes and look away. I don't want that stuff going in here. So be really curator. If you were walking through a buffet line and looking at the food and choosing food to put in your body, and there was rotten, stinking refuse in that buffet line, would you load up that your plate with it? Would you put any of that on your plate? You absolutely would not. Many of us treat our minds with far less respect than we treat our alimentary canal. We're not discriminating about what we put into our minds. We're watching news, watching stories that's like eating garbage, and you don't want to do that to your precious brain and your consciousness. Direct your consciousness to positive things. So positive people, positive media, and then our thoughts. My biggest source, personally, me, Dawson Church, biggest source of challenge is my thoughts. My thoughts are pretty much like that buffet, and there's a lot of garbage that surfaces in my own thinking every day. I wish I could tell you that after decades of doing this, I didn't have to worry about that anymore. But I'm sure there are saints who have don't have negative thoughts anymore, but I'm certainly not one of them. And I every day have to wrestle with my own negative thoughts. I'll see myself obsessing about something, and it's like focusing on the garbage. How do you break that cycle? And that's where meditation comes in, where spiritual practices come in. There are various ways of breaking that cycle. So the third thing, besides people, media, the third thing is inputs, your own thoughts. What do you do? And there's a lot of guidance. In my books, I give you methods to interrupt your thinking, pattern interrupt that pattern, to take that negative thought and just release it quickly. Don't keep harboring it any more than you would tolerate having crap on your dinner plate.
Well, that was a very vivid picture you painted.
Yeah, in case
Yes.
you didn't get the point.
So we've
Yeah.
talked a little bit about the potential of this process and what it can do for me individually. And I just want to expand it out and maybe orient it to like the wider view or vision of the potential of this. What could happen if whole groups of people start doing eco meditation?
Well, whole groups of people are doing meditation, and millions of people do eco meditation, but hundreds of millions of people are doing meditation. And Western countries have been tracking this. The Union has a European um, a pan-European tracking system for tracking this. In the US, we have the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, that tracks people doing meditation, prayer, various spiritual practices over the course of a week or a month. And the number of people doing it in 1980 was roughly 1% of the population. So one out of every 100 people was doing it in 1980. But by around 2005, around 4% of the population was doing it. Now, that's a massive increase. That's a 400% increase in the number of people meditating. Today, 20%. So in 1980, we had 1% of the population changing their brains, working out those neural muscles, firing and wiring those circuits of gratitude, peace, compassion, joy, love. Today, we have 20 times the number of people doing that, and it is producing massive change. We track the social changes that are happening, and we're on the threshold of a blizzard of radical social change, all toward the good, all toward compassion, all toward joy, all toward kindness, all toward inclusion, all toward peace, toward global well-being. So it may seem hard when you read the headlines, and I explain why in Bliss Brain and Spiritual Intelligence, why it seems hard if you're reading the news to spot these trends. But zoom out 30,000 foot view, and the global data is overwhelming that there is this new era of human flourishing that we human beings are in, driven by these spiritual intelligence practices like meditation and by various other forms of compassion we have as a society. So we're in the middle of this radical evolutionary shift. I mean, no species ever in history has been able to change its own brain in 30 days. We human beings have that gift, and we are using it en masse and are now producing massive social change as a result.
Well, I'm just going to tell you that when you're talking about all of that, I'm having, again, a physiological response, like the goosebumps of truth are rolling down my legs. Yes, there is potential here for us to change how we are in the world, and it's kind of exciting. Now, could I then say that maybe eco meditation is a bit of a systems disruptor?
It is. It's a shortcut to getting there quickly. So, the reason it's so effective is that all of these methods individually have a lot of research behind them. So, EFT has over 200 clinical trials. HeartMath has a lot of studies of that. Acupressure, acupuncture, over 15,000 studies. So, all of these methods are well studied. If you put them together, it gets you there really, really quickly. There are several studies of eco meditation now. It shifts people very, very rapidly. So you want to just do eco meditation, and we find even experienced meditators benefit from the steps in eco meditation. One of the cool things, talking about just systems disruptor, several clinical trials have been published very, very recently, and I report on these in my new book, Spiritual Intelligence. And what they're showing is that people who do this style of meditation, where they're shifting their physiology, there are several clinical trials of Alzheimer's patients. And in Alzheimer's patients, of course, your brain shrinks. The Alzheimer's brain shrinks up to 70%. I have an image in Spiritual Intelligence of a normal 65-year-old brain and an Alzheimer's brain. And the Alzheimer's brain is like a little walnut rattling around in that head. It is so tiny. Um, so the brain shrinks a lot with Alzheimer's. And of course, you have radical cognitive decline followed by death. So that's the course of Alzheimer's, cognitive decline and brain shrinkage. And they found that people doing this style of meditation, physiological meditation, where they're shifting their breathing, shifting their muscle patterns, those Alzheimer's patients doing that, they were expecting that it would change the course. They didn't have as rapid a brain decline. They found that did not happen with those Alzheimer's patients. Their brains began to grow again. So radical change, literally Alzheimer's brains regrowing with this kind of meditation. It's going to be able to affect all kinds of degenerative disease, and give us much healthier and much happier lifespans. It's going to shift society as a whole. It's going to affect a lot of individuals and people. And we're on the threshold of an absolutely remarkable shift in society as we implement these kinds of evidence-based changes on a global scale. So yeah, it is a game changer, and we're living through it right now.
I'm glad I get to be a part of this one. So we're coming to the end of our time, and I just want to ask, we've covered a lot of ground, but I always like to ask, is there anything that I didn't ask you about, but you wish I had?
Well, the bottom line I love to share with people is that we are beings of unlimited potential, and we are like people who are have available to us a palace, and we're living like in the outhouse. I mean, we're just not living our potential, and so you have a potential that you won't even believe until you start to do these practices and unveil it. And when you release your trauma, when you release your stress, when you shift from that mohawk to that hat band, shift from the default mode network to the task positive network, you develop that part of your brain, which you can do in 30 days. Your life just gets dramatically better and you start to live and express your potential. So that's really my prayer for us as individuals and for humankind is that we have the ability, we have extraordinary powers, which we barely begun to tap,
Mhm.
and that's where we're destined to move next. So claim this for yourself. Don't live small. Don't live in the outhouse. Go inhabit the palace.
That's probably the best takeaway for the entire show. Don't live in the outhouse, go live in the palace. This has been a mind expanding conversation and personally inspiring for me. So before we close, can you please tell the people how they can connect with you?
Sure, well, there's a lot you can do to participate in this whole cycle. And the basic thing to do is to go to the website Dawson, my name, just Dawson, and then the word gift, GIFT.com, DawsonGift.com. And you can download the EFT tapping manual and also a free eco meditation track. So go there and download those two. Just start using those right away. Use eco meditation for 30 days. And again, you're rewiring your brain. Use the tapping manual to release your stress, and then see what else is there. That's your access point. We have certified clinical EFT practitioners who can work with you and help release trauma. It doesn't take more than a few sessions. We have live classes. We have a lot of virtual ones as well. So it's all evidence-based material we have on EFT Universe. And again, it's all available through that DawsonGift.com link, and you'll find access there to all the other things. But at the least, download the manual, get the free meditation, and just start to then release those things that are holding you back.
Well, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to speak with us today. And your insights probably going to inspire, hopefully, some new eco meditation practitioners. I'm always on the hunt for things that make living a spirit guided life in a material world easier. And this really does sound like it will. So thank you for bringing Bliss Brain to the world.
It's a joy, Julia. It's a joy. This moment, it's a joy every day. Thanks for having me.
Well, that's our time for today. Evolving Humans is now on YouTube, along with the Channeling Project releases and other content not available on the podcast. Click on the link in the show notes and subscribe so you don't miss any new content. And now, here's a quote for you to ponder as you go about your day. While material things may come and go, the core of eternal energy that is the truth of our being and not be burned.
Thank you. 'Dawson. 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 '